no one ever saw Jaime Sommers collapse. On screen, she always stood tall, always in control, always making the right choice, even when her body was destroyed and rebuilt by technology. Jaime Sommers was the role that turned Lindsay Wagner into a television icon of 1970s America, the embodiment of the kind of woman that era wanted, strong but not threatening, independent but not disruptive, and almost never wrong. But when the cameras stopped rolling, what remained was not an icon, but a life schedule, quietly carrying the expectations that had been created in front of the lens. Perfection, once it becomes an identity, is no longer a choice. It begins to intrude into the way someone loves, leaves, and stays silent. For Lindsay Wagner, time did not take the shape of a single turning point. It accumulated. And when a television image is repeated long enough, the question is no longer how famous it became, but how far it followed the actress behind it. This article begins with that question. Lindsay Wagner was born in Los Angeles in 1949. By the time her earliest memories began to form, the family was no longer intact. Her parents separated so early that what remained wasn't a single clear image of collapse, but the sense that everything was always temporary. Meals, rooms, conversations, none of it lasted long enough to become a habit. When her mother remarried and moved her to Portland, Oregon, Wagner entered a different space. The city was smaller, quieter, less restless than Los Angeles. That quiet made everything sharper. She was living inside an order that had already been arranged. Wagner learned to slow down at thresholds, to watch who spoke first, who sat where, what rhythm the room followed. Only once everything had settled would she place herself into a position that wouldn't disturb it. At home and in the classroom, Wagner was rarely the first to speak. She said just enough, adjusted her tone to fit, and stopped the moment a conversation tightened. There were no loud arguments to remember, only the feeling that she always had to regulate herself so she wouldn't throw off the shared atmosphere. Presence, for her, became a delicate operation rather than a declaration. There was one place where she didn't have to do that. The stage, school plays, and community theater offered a different kind of order. There, positions were predetermined. A character stepped out at the right moment, said lines already written, then exited when it was time. No one demanded she explain who she was beyond the role. Wagner stood under the lights without feeling like she was being seen through. Everything had boundaries, and those boundaries felt comforting. Reading and keeping pace in class did not come easily. Long passages forced her to stop longer than everyone else. Questions that required quick reactions often passed before she could organize her words. When dyslexia was finally named, life didn't suddenly change. Wagner had already learned to rely on sensation and images rather than text, remembering through space, through movement, through standing in the right place in a room. Her education became fragmented. Wagner attended David Douglas High School, then left the United States for a few months to live in France. Not like an adventure, but like a breath, a place where no one measured speed, no one demanded she keep up. She returned and studied at the University of Oregon for a year, then transferred to Mount Hood Community College and stopped after 6 months. Leaving happened quietly, the way she always left spaces that began to feel too tight. By the late 1960s, Wagner returned to Los Angeles. The city was familiar, but she came back without a ready-made role. There was no long-term plan, no dream given a name, only a return to a place where presence could exist before it had to be explained. Wagner's earliest steps into the entertainment world did not begin with acting, but with image. Modeling became an almost natural choice in that period. The body was placed within a frame, the lighting completed its work, and presence did not require self-explanation. Wagner moved within that structure with a familiar feeling. The spot was already marked, the timing already set, and what mattered most was standing still at the right moment. On set, she didn't need to talk much. The space operated on her behalf. Other people's eyes weren't searching for a personal story. They were checking whether the composition was still intact. Wagner fit that rhythm, one that didn't demand stepping into the center, only that she not tilt the existing order out of place. Appearing as a hostess on Playboy After Dark placed her inside a space already fully designed. The music arrived on cue, the lighting moved along fixed pathways, and people became part of the setting more than its subject. Wagner passed through the frame like a connector, not a highlight. That presence didn't need to be remembered, only not noticed as being in the wrong place. In 1969, she appeared on The Dating Game. There, the body was treated as a choice, not a person steering the story. The questions moved quickly. The gaze shifted constantly, and everything unfolded in a rhythm that left no aftertaste. Wagner did not leave the program with fame, but she carried away one concrete experience: standing in front of a camera without needing to dominate it, being inside other people's attention without being pulled out of position. Those appearances did not form a clear beginning. They only established a condition. Wagner had grown accustomed to existing inside a frame before anyone demanded that she narrate her own story. And from that state, her later career began to open, slowly, quietly, and in step with the way she had already been living. In 1971, Wagner signed with Universal Studios and entered the system as a contract player, a position that functioned purely according to the studio mechanism. Work arrived steadily, shooting schedules were dense, and her image was managed from the outside. The roles did not belong to her in any personal sense. They were assigned to serve the machine that was already running. Wagner did not control how she would be seen. She arrived early, stood on the taped mark, delivered the line, and left the frame before anyone else had to wait. Within that rhythm, the limits that had long existed quietly began to surface. Long scripts, fast sets, the demand to process dialogue with accuracy and continuity. These repeatedly placed Wagner under a familiar pressure. Being diagnosed with dyslexia did not arrive as a dramatic turning point, but as a line redrawn. Not everything could be solved through text and speed. Wagner adjusted her way of working. She came to set earlier than necessary, walked through the space of a scene before cameras rolled, letting her body memorize position and rhythm. Dialogue was not learned by reading it over and over, but through movement, through breath, through placing the body correctly before placing words into the mouth. Once the camera turned on, reaction came before explanation. Presence stayed steady, never showy. That method made Wagner an actress the system could easily place. She did not demand major adjustments, did not create friction, and could be used across many structures without disrupting the common rhythm. Roles came regularly, but were rarely designed to stand out. Wagner existed in the frame as part of how a scene functioned, not as the final emphasis meant to linger. In 1973, Wagner crossed into film with two people. For the first time, she had to hold a character within a wider space than television, where the eye was not chopped into fragments by fast editing, and every small movement was magnified. The film did not push Wagner into the center of events. It required her to remain with emotion for longer silences. The camera did not rush away. The space did not assist with dense pacing. The weight of the character therefore fell more heavily on the body than on speech. That same year, Wagner appeared in The Paper Chase. The role was smaller, but the working environment was entirely different. The script held its rhythm, performance was not built to serve broadcast timing, and each scene demanded precision of state rather than quick reflex. Wagner stood inside that structure like someone already trained in discipline, but not yet fully native to the language of cinema. She was not rejected, nor was she kept. Everything stopped at recognition. Those brief touches with film opened possibility, but did not create momentum. There was no follow-up offer strong enough to pull Wagner away from the television machine that was running steadily. Film saw in her a dependable stability, but had not yet found how to place that stability into an image worth pursuing long-term. After that, Wagner returned to her familiar rhythm. Television continued to provide regular roles, consecutive shooting schedules, and a kind of professional safety that came without the right to choose. Roles arrived and left. No one asked who she would become. They only needed her to show up on time, say the lines, and leave when the scene ended. Wagner operated within that rhythm with fluency, as if she had accepted that her career would continue flowing in a current that produced no shockwaves, but also never pushed her out. When she accepted the $6 Million Man in 1975, Wagner entered the project like any other television job. Jaime Sommers was written as a woman from Steve Austin's past. Some flashbacks, a few emotional exchanges, and then disappearance. On set, everything moved fast and clean. The script was closed. The schedule was heavy. Nothing suggested this role needed to be kept. Jaime Sommers died in the script. The episode aired, and the reaction exceeded every expectation. In the first few days, the network's phones did not stop ringing. Viewer letters arrived in sacks, filling office rooms. Operators logged the same question again and again, spoken in different voices but carrying the same demand. Bring her back. The name Jaime Sommers appeared in conversations, in newspapers, in letters addressed directly to the producers, more often than the name of the actress who played her. This was not ordinary regret after an episode. A character written to leave had created a void the audience refused to accept. Jaime Sommers vanished from the screen, but continued to exist in viewers' lives, as if that death had never been approved. By the end of 1975, the script was rewritten. Jaime returned through a severe accident and a process of rebuilding her body through technology. From that point on, the role was no longer driven mainly by dialogue. The storytelling rhythm dropped into the body. Every step, every movement had to be calculated. Action space was designed to minimize randomness. The character was not allowed to lose control, even in the most dangerous moment. Audience feedback throughout 1976 arrived thick and constant. The decision to develop a separate series was not formed from long-term intent, but from pressure to meet a demand that had exceeded the original plan. When The Bionic Woman premiered in early 1976, Jaime Sommers appeared as an image that required no introduction. The series quickly held a stable position in the Nielsen Top 20, becoming an evening habit repeated regularly across millions of American households. On set, the work rhythm was organized to maintain that image. Wagner was strapped at the waist and hips. The harness was checked, tightened, then locked into the overhead system. The camera was set low. Running paths were marked on the floor. Everyone waited for the cue. When the scene began, movement was not allowed to be fast. The body was lifted, lowered, held suspended at a speed already calculated. If a foot landed off the mark, the wire pulled wrong. If the hips rotated too early, the shot had to be repeated. Every motion had to be precise enough to create the sensation of absolute control. After each cut, the wires lowered, the straps loosened, then tightened again for the next take. On screen, the body looked light and stable. Outside the frame, breathing was kept even before the camera rolled again. Scenes like that repeated, not as climaxes, but as a daily rhythm of labor. Meanwhile, Jaime Sommers' image moved beyond the set. On magazine covers and television programs, people spoke the character's name more often than the performers. There was no need to retell plot. The upright posture, the steady gait, the way the body held itself still in front of the lens, those were enough to recognize her. In public appearances, Wagner did not change how she carried her presence. She spoke briefly, kept her voice steady, and did not push her body into frames designed to attract through display. Some offers were refused without explanation. Certain camera angles were not accepted. Control did not exist as a statement. It existed in standing in the right place, stopping at the right moment, and not taking the extra half step when it wasn't needed. When the series moved to NBC, the production structure changed. Shooting schedules were adjusted, but the character was not bent into short-term peaks. Jaime continued operating under the same standard already established. Stable, not shocking, not twisted out of alignment to buy immediate reaction. What viewers were used to was preserved, not for safety, but because it had proven it could hold. In 1977, Lindsay Wagner won the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a drama series. For the first time in American television history, a science fiction role carried by a female performer was honored in the lead acting category. That award did not create a new category, nor did it change the criteria. It appeared as an exception, one that forced the system to acknowledge what was already happening in front of it. On the acceptance stage, Wagner appeared with the same rhythm she had long practiced. She stood still at the microphone, spoke briefly, and walked away without trying to separate herself from the image that had clung to her for seasons. That presence did not make Jaime Sommers look more serious in the eyes of the awards machine. It showed that this character had stood solidly long enough that she no longer needed to be propped up by explanation. The Emmy repositioned Jaime Sommers in public life. The character was no longer viewed as a television entertainment experiment, but as a stable model. A woman who acted with calmness, controlled situations without having to display strength, held power through rhythm and operation rather than direct confrontation. No slogan was announced. Only a way of existing repeated long enough for others to begin recognizing it as its own standard. As the Bionic Woman reached peak operation, the series' commercial value rose, quickly and steadily. The character was exploited on multiple layers: domestic and international reruns, tie-in products, image licensing. Jaime Sommers was not only watched, she was printed, copied, and recalled as a familiar signal. Her mere appearance was enough to activate public memory. At the same time, shooting schedules began to stretch. Work days increased. Commercial extraction moved ahead of bodily rhythm. Wagner did not object through declarations. She asked very specific questions: how long each shooting day would run, how many consecutive days the schedule would demand, and how far the body could take it before it began to slip out of rhythm. Those questions did not interrupt the system, but they were not answered decisively either. Tension formed in silence. The schedule kept expanding. Conversations were pushed back. In a structure accustomed to running smoothly, negotiating physical limits was treated as an element that slowed the chain. The more stable the character became, the less willing the system was to adjust. In parallel, Jaime's image was flattened for market convenience. The character appeared on toys, posters, promotional campaigns, anything that needed a face that could be printed on every surface. Complexity was reduced into a few easy signals: strong, proper, unbreakable. At this level, no one needed to know how Jaime hesitated in a scene or what she thought before a choice. They only needed her to be right, according to the familiar template. In cultural life, Jaime Sommers existed like a habit. She did not provoke major controversy. She did not deliver shock. But she was not easily removed either. A model of a woman who acted through calmness, controlled situations without displaying strength, Different enough to be remembered, safe enough to be repeated. That very stability began to close off other possibilities. When every metric held still, ratings, awards, commercial value, recognizability, the image stopped moving. Success no longer needed to be pursued. It needed to be preserved. After leaving the central orbit of the bionic woman, Wagner continued working in television, but at a different rhythm. A hotel room pressed against a highway, thick curtains pulled shut even while daylight still remained. A script lay on the table, its plastic cover slightly bent from humidity, pages marked with small yellow tabs. Wagner read slowly, not in page order, stopping at passages that required consecutive night shoots. The air conditioner ran evenly, a low hum repeating like an unchanging underbeat. She folded the script shut, set it aside, and looked at the shooting schedule printed on the back, days linked together by short arrows, almost no gaps. No decision was made then, only the act of leaving the script on the table longer than expected. Projects continued to arrive steadily, but no longer around structures that demanded the repetition of a familiar image at mass scale. Wagner appeared in television films and miniseries such as Scruples, The Paper Chase, Policewoman, The Taking of Flight. 847. Projects built on closed stories where a character entered a situation and left once the story completed. There, a role did not have to carry expectations of creating another peak, nor was it required to be kept after the frame moved on. In the same period, Wagner did not participate in major commercial film projects, even as she continued appearing regularly on the small screen and remained a familiar presence within the television system. This absence did not happen abruptly, nor did it come with a statement. It formed through successive choices, consistent and difficult to reverse. Work kept linking itself forward, largely within structures that allowed time to be controlled more tightly. Wagner stayed long enough for a character to have weight, then left before the image was pulled back into the center. There were no long gaps. There was also no effort to expand the scale of her presence. In those years, Wagner did not win another Emmy. Her name still appeared regularly in nomination lists and professional evaluations, attached to roles praised for reliability and consistency. Her public presence remained moderate, not tied to personal life or side narratives. Work continued, quietly, without interruption, without being pushed into another shape. Wagner's working rhythm changed in a way hard to detect if one looked only at the calendar. The camera no longer held the center. A small meeting room, chairs arranged into an uneven circle. A few shifted completely off axis. Wagner arrived early, set a bottle of water on the floor, then stood still for a moment, checking the light from the window behind. There was no stage, no microphone. As participants entered one by one, she gave a slight nod, pointed to empty seats, offered no long introduction. The talk began with silence, longer than usual, long enough for the room's breathing to adjust itself. When Wagner spoke, her voice stayed low and even, as if talking inside a familiar room, as if she did not need anyone to remember her name. But some limits did not come from contracts. They came from the body, and when those limits surfaced, the system could no longer pretend everything was only production rhythm. There was one collision that forced the working structure around Wagner to shift its view without needing any declaration. And from that point on, every working rhythm afterward had to pass through the body before it passed through the schedule. At first, the media framed these activities as a choice outside Hollywood's orbit. Articles often asked why a television star stepped away from the screen to speak about healing and personal development. Wagner's presence in those spaces was not widely promoted, nor attached to a new image campaign. The talks continued. Books continued to be printed. Some people returned more than once. When Wagner entered the room, no one needed to mention Jaime Sommers to begin the meeting. The role's name did not disappear. but it was no longer a condition for conversation to happen. Over time, practices once treated as peripheral were placed into more familiar rhythms of everyday life. They appeared in daily schedules, in the language of self-care, in small choices repeated each day. Wagner did not explain the shift. She continued working in the spaces she had chosen, maintaining the same steady rhythm, as if this was not a new direction, but work that had been there all along. Then something happened, something outside every prepared orbit. In the first year, the Bionic Woman aired on a stretch of highway. The car carrying Lindsay Wagner and Michael Brandon, her husband at the time, was involved in a serious crash. Brandon suffered severe eye trauma, leaving long-term damage to his vision. Wagner's lip was torn and required multiple stitches. The wound healed slowly and left a clearly visible scar. Some scenes had to be reshot. The lighting was softened. Camera angles were calculated more carefully to avoid direct close-ups. These adjustments were not spoken aloud within the story, but they existed quietly in the way the character appeared on screen. It was the first time Wagner's real body forced the production structure to adapt, not for creative reasons, but because of a limit that could not be negotiated. Jaime Sommers could be rebuilt through technology in the script. But in real life, the body of the actress carrying that role kept its marks in a way that could not be fully undone. The crash did not end on set. It followed her home. During recovery, Wagner and Michael Brandon's daily rhythm was disrupted. More breaks appeared. At the same time, silences began to fill the spaces between routines that had once fit together. There was a very small evening, unrecorded in any file. Wagner arrived home late, set her bag on the floor, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. The stitched line on her lip had healed, but when she pressed her mouth into a smile, the muscles no longer responded the same way. The smile tilted by a fraction of a beat, enough that no one else would notice, but enough that she could not ignore it. Wagner did not call it a loss. She stood still for a few more seconds, then turned off the light and left the room. But from that moment, one thing was no longer intact: the belief that the body could always be adjusted to match the image the job required. Jaime Sommers could be reconstructed in the script. In real life, that slight misalignment did not vanish. It stayed as a new limit, quiet, but impossible to dismiss. From then on, choosing roles began to feel like working through conditions rather than following momentum. Projects that came afterward were no longer selected for reach, but for shooting rhythm and the ability to keep the body within the required standard. By the end of the 1970s, the change was no longer in the roles Wagner played, but in how she had to move to keep up with them. And it was in that movement that the rhythm began to crack. In 1979, that limit surfaced in a way no one had prepared for. Lindsay Wagner had a same-day flight scheduled, one trip threaded between the familiar motions of work. Not long before departure, her body slowed by the smallest fraction of a beat. No pain, no dizziness, only a fatigue that did not match the timetable already laid out. Wagner paused at the counter for a few extra seconds, then stepped away. She sat down in the waiting area, made a short phone call to report the change, and went home earlier than planned. After that, the flight crashed. There were no survivors. Wagner did not turn it into a story to tell. She simply changed how she worked, reading schedules more slowly, asking more carefully about conditions, allowing blank space to exist as part of an invisible contract. From there, her career continued, but in shorter steps, less dependent on always having to be present. Fatigue, something that had once been pushed aside by responsibility and production pace, began to be kept close and listened to. Wagner canceled a trip when her body didn't respond, refused a work rhythm when the schedule tightened too hard, stayed home on days when nothing happened. No major decision was announced, only a chain of small adjustments, repeated often enough to slow her life down and make the distance from work more visible. The first shifts showed up on the calendar. Time between flights stretched. Some trips were canceled at the last minute, not for professional reasons, but because the body no longer met the demands of dense travel the way it once had. Wagner began reading more closely the contract clauses about locations, days away from home, and recovery time between stretches of work. Those questions weren't raised in large conference rooms. They were weighed with precision inside daily life. How many nights away? Who would pick up her child? How far the household rhythm would be thrown off? Refusals did not happen loudly. Some invitations simply went unanswered. Others were delayed until they fell off the schedule on their own. Empty spaces appeared between projects and were not immediately filled. They existed as unplanned breaks, time not placed under pressure to produce outcomes. Inside those gaps, Wagner stayed home more, not to rest in a passive sense, but to rebuild routines that had been pushed to the margins by shooting and travel. Driving her child to school, cooking dinner on time, staying inside after dark became fixed points. They carried no symbolism, but they created a day-night structure that had rarely existed long enough before to be maintained. It was in this slower rhythm that a different path began to form, not as a career pivot, but as a way of continuing to work under different conditions. Wagner began teaching at San Bernardino Valley College. Standing in front of a class was not announced as a new role. It happened quietly, in spaces without stage lights, where presence was not measured by recognizability. Classes took place in small rooms, with steady light, chairs arranged neatly. Wagner arrived early, organized materials, stayed after to answer questions that weren't in the syllabus. There, she wasn't seen as a television icon, but as someone who had traveled far enough inside the system to understand its limits. The stories she shared were not meant to feed ambition, nor to warn with melodramatic tragedy. They centered on work rhythm, protecting the body, and the small choices that can keep someone in the craft longer. Students came from many backgrounds, most without a clear place in the industry yet. Wagner offered no formula for success. She spoke about showing up on time, reading contracts carefully, and knowing when to stop. These lessons weren't inspirational in the familiar sense. They felt like practical guidance, drawn from a life that had absorbed enough collisions to no longer need emphasis. Teaching created a different daily structure for Wagner. Class sessions were arranged between acting jobs that grew less frequent. Time was broken into smaller pieces, no longer compressed into long stretches of continuous labor. Within this structure, the profession was no longer the single center ruling her schedule. It became one part among many, adjustable without collapsing the whole rhythm. Alongside teaching, Wagner spent more time writing and practicing holistic health care. She did not present these activities as a complete theoretical system. They came from a very specific need, learning to live with the body instead of forcing it to meet standards once treated as normal. The writing was steady, but not driven by urgent publishing deadlines. Wagner recorded personal experiences, observations about the body, and methods she tested to sustain balance in daily life. Some approaches did not belong to mainstream medicine. They carried a certain level of controversy. Wagner did not avoid that, but she did not try to persuade either. She spoke of them as personal choices, validated through lived experience, not offered as universal solutions. Talks about mental well-being and holistic living took place in small spaces, with limited attendance. No large stage, no arranged lighting. These meetings operated through direct presence. Each person brought their own story and left without needing a shared conclusion. Wagner was there as someone who had crossed certain limits, willing to speak about them without turning them into moral instruction. These activities did not replace acting. They ran alongside it, creating a life structure in which work was no longer defined by visibility. When a role arrived, it was weighed inside that context, not only by the script, but by the conditions attached. Time away from home, shooting rhythm, the ability to keep daily life stable. That is why Wagner's on-screen presence in later years became rarer and more selective. The roles were not built to reignite the Jaime Sommers image. They appeared as brief points of contact, enough to place her inside a story's structure without dragging the weight of collective memory behind her. In those spaces, Wagner didn't need to dominate the frame. She was present just enough, then withdrew once the function was complete. When she accepted Death Stranding in 2019, Wagner stepped into another kind of presence. The project did not require her to carry the familiar image. The role existed inside a fragmented world where memory was no longer tied to the body in traditional ways. The work happened in a studio through motion capture technology. The studio was dark. Screens displayed waveforms moving with the rhythm of breath. Wagner put on headphones, adjusted the mic cable near her collar. The motion capture suit fit tightly. Reflective markers caught cold light. The director spoke softly through her headset, asking for one line again, slower. Wagner closed her eyes for a few seconds, then read it again. Low voice. Even. No one mentioned television. No one said the name of the past. Only data being captured. The scene ended. The studio returned to standby. In that space, Wagner was seen as a voice, a movement, a technical presence. The professional experience was still there, but it did not drag the old image history with it. Death Stranding was not called a comeback. It happened and it ended, like a job completed under different conditions. No publicity campaign. No need to prove anything. Wagner left the studio and returned to the rhythm of life she had already arranged. At this point, the on-screen work had nearly reached the end of its road. What remained belonged to how a real life had to reorganize itself around an image repeated for too long. Wagner's private life had always moved in a rhythm that was hard to seal into something whole. Relationships formed beside shooting schedules then had to adapt to long absences. Intimacy wasn't broken by one major event, but by days lined up without matching hours. In 1971, as her television work began accelerating, Lindsay Wagner married Michael Brandon, an English actor working in the United States. Brandon was used to theater and sets, to a rhythm with clear beginnings and endings. Wagner lived inside an expanding network schedule, where tomorrow was often rewritten in the middle of the night. They rented an apartment near Universal Studios to make commuting easier, but they rarely left home at the same time. Brandon usually returned first. Wagner came back late, when the apartment was already dark, a script waiting on the kitchen table. Conversations happened in fragments, squeezed between shooting hours and unfinished sleep. When the bionic woman went on the air, shared evenings nearly disappeared. The schedule stretched. Trips followed one after another. Meals were cut short to catch a last-minute call announcing a script change. After the highway accident, Brandon stayed home more. Wagner went back to set while the stitches on her lip were still there. No one spoke of stopping. They continued living in the same space, but each held onto a separate rhythm. There were evenings that began with a prepared dinner. Wagner arrived home when the food had already gone cold. The phone rang. An urgent schedule change was delivered. She listened, briefly, nodded, then stood still for a few seconds before turning into the dressing room. When she left again, the dining table remained untouched. No one cleared it. No one called out. Dinner ended without needing a closing line. Life later moved to a different rhythm. When she lived with Henry Kingi, time no longer revolved around Wagner's schedule alone. The birth of two sons locked day and night into hours that could not be shifted. Mornings began with getting the children ready. Evenings often meant eating late, or not finishing a meal at all. Wagner left set early to pick them up, then returned to complete unfinished scenes when the studio had already thinned out. Some nights she stayed home while an event happened elsewhere. Lights turning on right on time without her there. Days off were no longer empty. They were used for tasks that couldn't be postponed. Doctor visits, school schedules, small details no one else could replace. That rhythm did not create silence. It simply moved the center of gravity, placing her presence in spaces with less light, but demanding full attendance in a different way. Routines once shared gradually separated into individual parts. Meal times no longer matched. Homecoming hours no longer waited. Picking up the children was decided day by day. The shared life did not end with one decisive conversation, but with fewer and fewer things that still required coordination. What kept its rhythm was motherhood. Daily presence, repeated, needing no confirmation. From here on, every new offer had to be weighed in practical terms. How long she would be away, how far the household rhythm would tilt, and whether her absence would leave a gap no one could fill. In that life, affection did not disappear. It often surfaced only after Wagner had spent all her energy maintaining the rhythm. Not because the bond was weak, but because there was no longer enough space left to rebuild a shared shape that could stay still over time. In recent years, Wagner's public appearances have been sparse. When she does appear, it is usually in smaller spaces, places where fame is no longer the main operating condition. She arrives, does the work, and leaves, without the need to repeat the past or expand an image. Most of her time is devoted to work that does not require an audience, writing, teaching, and sustaining personal practices that have become part of everyday life. Her schedule is built around specific anchors, waking hours, meals, work time, and breaks that are not automatically filled. Projects arrive more slowly, some are accepted, some are not. Decisions usually come down to very concrete questions. How long she must be away, how far her life will be pulled out of alignment, and whether her body can still bear it. Mornings begin slowly, not tied to a fixed working timetable. Wagner wakes when the light has risen high enough, makes tea, and sits still in a room that holds no other sound yet. On the table are a few unfinished pages of notes, unnumbered, out of order. Some days bring no calls at all. Some days the phone vibrates, then is placed back down and left there for a few beats. Jaime Sommers continues to exist outside that rhythm, in syllabi, in television analysis, in the memory of those who grew up with that straight posture and steady stride. The image is still invoked when people need a standard of endurance and control, but it no longer dictates the day and night schedule of the woman who carried it for so many years. Wagner moves through small tasks that have become routine, writing, teaching, meetings that do not require a stage. When a project appears, it is placed next to the existing rhythm of her life, weighed carefully, then either accepted or allowed to pass. The phone sometimes vibrates. Sometimes it stays silent. The day still moves forward through anchors that only need to be kept on time. Some people hold their rhythm by clinging tightly to the image that made their name. Others hold it by shrinking the world, keeping the noise outside the door, protecting what matters from being swallowed by schedules. Strength, then, isn't found in dazzling moments, but in the ability to set limits, choose conditions, decide what is allowed to enter one's life and what must stop at the threshold. If you grew up with that image, or if you're only meeting it for the first time today, leave a detailed comment about the moment you remember most about Lindsay Wagner. And don't forget to hit like, share this video with someone else who loves classic television, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories.